Good morning, McQuaid Jesuit faculty, staff, and students. My name is Joe Piccolo, and I'm excited to welcome you to Agape Latte 16, Finally Brothers. Agape Latte is a national program that was created at Boston College with the intention of letting people share their amazing faith-based stories with other people in an informal setting. The title for Agape Latte comes from the Greek word for the selfless, sacrificial, unconditional love of God, agape. Our speaker this morning is Mr. Adam Baber, our principal. A Canisius alumnus, a Brother Jesuit school, Mr. Baber graduated and attended Bowdoin College to study history and music. He then pursued his master's degree at Stanford University. He's been at McQuaid for the last 8 years, serving as principal and teaching history. I've been lucky enough to have AP European History with Mr. Baber this year, and despite not knowing much, he has made the course understandable and has prepared me well to take the AP next week. I can confidently say that his class is one of the best classes I have taken at McQuaid. He is a welcoming face in the morning and greets each of us by name. He's continued to be a mentor and guide for me throughout my time at McQuaid. Although we are sad you are finishing up your time as principal, we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. You have been a blessing to the McQuaid community. Now please join me in offering a warm welcome to Mr. Baber.
Thank you, Joe. Expect a 5 on that AP exam from you. Thanks, everybody, for coming. It's an honor to see so many faces. You could be having a breakfast burrito in the cafeteria or studying for a test, heaven forbid. So I appreciate you being here. Finally, brothers, whatever is shallow, whatever is easy, whatever is flattering, whatever is a shortcut, whatever's on your screen, if there's anything convenient and if there's anything worthy of your ego, think about these things, but not too much. Keep on hanging on, bro. Then God won't bother you. To be clear, these are not the words that St. Paul wrote to the Christians of Philippi, the first Christian community in Europe. Paul was, after all, in prison when he wrote his letter to the Philippians and faced the very real possibility that he was not going to leave that prison alive. But the lines Paul actually wrote demand a lot from me and from you. They invite and promise a lot, too. The idea of Agape Latte is for the speaker to share a bit about his or her faith journey. I am a baptized and confirmed Roman Catholic. I attended Catholic schools from kindergarten through my senior year in high school. My mother, not my father, was Catholic as well, and it was she who was my first model of what it means to be faithful. We would attend Mass weekly, and I went through the various initiations into the life of the Catholic Church. I recall my first reconciliation in second grade. I had to make a banner to carry into church and out of felt, and it featured a dove representing peace. I remember my first communion the year later, and my friends and I talking about the strange taste of the unconsecrated wafer during our rehearsal. I remember my confirmation, my taking the confirmation name of Vincent, and the Bishop of Buffalo at the time, Henry Mansell, complimenting me on my choice of a saint who was so devoted to the poor. But I'll be honest, my most important moment in my faith journey came in my freshman year of college at a school, as Joe mentioned, called Bowdoin, a small liberal arts college up in Maine. I was waitlisted for admission to the school and was ultimately admitted at the last possible moment in August of 2001. And I ultimately trusted that it was meant to be. It was meant to be. In my freshman dorm, Appleton Hall, a place where Harriet Beecher Stowe had written drafts of Uncle Tom's Cabin, was just steps from the Bowdoin Chapel, an amazing building designed by the great architect Richard Upjohn, gifted with incredible stained glass, a steadfast bell tower, an impressive pipe organ. And at 4:30 every Sunday afternoon, a Catholic priest came to campus to say Mass. I didn't get there every weekend, but beginning early in my freshman year, I got there often enough. And for the first time in my life, I took control of my faith. The larger circumstances surrounding that start of my freshman year probably had something to do with it. It was a Tuesday morning very early in my freshman year that I realized the world is much bigger than anything I had experienced in Buffalo. I still recall the kind woman at the campus post office asking me, "Have you heard? There's a plane that's just flown into the World Trade Center." Went back to my dorm and turned on the TV in the common room, and there I watched, along with our dorm custodian, of all people, an attack on our country. Later that day, I attended an all-campus meeting and vigil led by the various college deans whose names I had yet to learn. I listened to their speeches, but what struck me most was the invited comments from others in the audience. Muslim students appealing against stereotypes. Americans praying for peace. Jewish students noting the ongoing prejudice and fear they endure. In his extraordinary novel, The Power and the Glory, Graham Greene writes, "There is always one moment in childhood when the door opens and lets the future in." For me, this was that moment. This 18-year-old suburban white dude from Buffalo has a lot to see, a lot to experience, a lot to learn, a lot to think about. It was at this point, I think, that my faith journey took a critical turn. It was not a turn away from Catholicism necessarily, but it was a recognition that the world is vast. It contains multitudes. It was a recognition that, as the great Jewish theologian Abraham Joshua Heschel once said, we are closer to God when we are asking questions than when we think we have the answers. Put simply, it introduced me to the idea of being humble, to let myself go before God or anything else spiritual, and to recognize ultimately that I am part of something bigger than myself. It's humbling to realize that you have a lot to learn. It's humbling to realize that you have shortcomings, flaws, to recognize that you're a sinner. To be humbled, to go to the root of that word, humility, means to be close to the ground, to be lowly, to taste and feel the earth, to be dirty. It's why Jesus washes the disciples' feet at the Last Supper. Their feet were actually dirty, and to clean them was a genuine, practical act of service. You know, I think back on the times I've been humbled, and I think they have been extraordinary moments in my faith journey and my growth as a person and as a man. I think back to my start as an educator. I had no business being a teacher in 2005, just a few months after graduating from college. As a 22-year-old, I was assigned 3 sections of seniors, just 4 years younger than me. One of my closest friends from high school's younger brother was in the very first class I ever taught. I ate lunch every day those first few months in an isolated office in a condemned old building that was about to be demolished, hoping I simply didn't screw up or lose control of the classroom for the remainder of the day. At the time, I was still planning to go to law school, but I was haunted by the thought, if I can't manage a group of teenagers, how on earth could I ever convince a jury or appeal to a judge? Just a few years later, my mother died unexpectedly. I had never braced for the possibility of losing a parent so early in my life. Some of you who have been on a Kairos retreat know more about this story. To put it simply, it was an incredibly confusing, disorienting time for me and my father. In time, I came to learn my mother's extraordinary story, bottomless love, an amazing example. A story that, through my own weakness, I could only appreciate when she was gone. It made me reflect on why I was who I was, the opportunities I have, and I felt humbled to be the recipient of such unconditional love and care. Just as I arguably had no business being a teacher in 2005, I had no business being a principal 10 years later in 2015. I can remember my interviews here at McQuaid, the conversations with teachers, other administrators, with parents, and with students. And when I began here, I was floored by the warm welcome and the support I had from so many. And yet, I really did feel a bit of imposter syndrome. Who was I to take charge of a school? Did I really have what it demanded? Could I face the challenges I knew would come? Surely enough, the challenges soon came. People needed to be hired. People needed to be fired. Policies needed to be reviewed, sometimes changed. New initiatives waited in the wings. Sometimes students, young men like you, needed to be told that this was not the school for them. All of these were profoundly human challenges because they directly affected people's lives. I had the support of a great team, most members of which are here in this room. But I will be honest with you. I cannot deny how I struggled with this. I struggled a lot. Ultimately, in a few years, these struggles caught up with me. I recall the day in May of 2018, excuse me, after taking the usual morning shower, I fell to the floor in my apartment. And I lay there for the better part of the day. I was literally and figuratively paralyzed. I finally faced what had been true for some time. I was deeply depressed. I took a leave of absence from my position so I could care for my mental health and receive the care that I needed. It was surreal, really. I was disconnected from the world, except for my father, my therapist, and the group from the University of Rochester with whom I met for several months. But over time, I learned the skills I needed to cope with what I was feeling. And against a lot of odds, I was able to return to being principal. Yes, I returned, but I still, in a mostly private way, struggled. One evening in January 2020, just a few weeks before the pandemic, which we all remember, was to alter all of our lives, I was driving home from a dinner, and I saw flashing red lights in my rearview mirror. The sheriff had observed me speeding. At dinner, I had also had a few drinks. I was arrested, handcuffed, and put in the back of a sheriff's car and taken to jail. Something never in my wildest imagination I thought would happen. I felt profoundly alone, deeply ashamed. Shame, I have come to learn, is one of the most authentic emotions we can feel. And when my arrest became public in April of that year, all of us were constrained by the pandemic, and I sat alone, socially distanced in my apartment, watching my mugshot appear on social media, receiving occasional text messages, and wondering if it was the end. It was not the end. We don't get to decide when the end is. Only God gets to decide that. In a famous passage, the prophet Micah writes, "You have been told, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, only to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with our God. To walk humbly with God, according to Micah's successor, the monk Thomas Merton, is to be precisely the person you actually are before God. Well, God, I'm a sinner. I've made mistakes. I've fallen short. I've doubted myself, and I've doubted you. But, as Micah exhorts, I believe I love kindness. Kindness, I think, is the only proper response to being humbled, to recognizing that I, too, am among those who need help, who need companionship, who need redemption, who need lifting up from the humble earth. Because you know what? That person next to you, that person in your class, that person on your team, that family member, that stranger even, they too need help, companionship, and redemption. Have you ever thought that maybe it's you who will bring them those things? Have you ever imagined that you are an instrument of God's love? I'm really serious about that. If you remember nothing else from what I share this morning, remember this question. Have you ever thought that you, simply by being precisely the person you actually are a way that God shows God's love on earth? One of the reasons I'm so drawn to being an educator, something to be clear I plan to continue to be after I step down as principal, is the origins of the word. The word educate, according to its Latin root, means literally to lead out, to draw out that which is already within. And I suppose my most fundamental belief as a teacher, which is to say my most fundamental belief as a person, is that there's always good within anyone made in God's image, waiting to be drawn out. Even in my most difficult moments in this role as your principal, when I've had to send nights away, as recently as yesterday, I have not shaken this belief. I think it sustained me. The poet Mary Oliver, in perhaps her most famous line, asks a provocative question. What are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? We only get one life. What we do with it is what we choose. Mindful of how we have all fallen short in some way, how we are all sinners in some way, how we hold out hope in some way, how could we possibly choose anything other than kindness to one another? It costs us nothing. It asks nothing. It is simply a way of saying, I see you, I know you, and I care about you. Kindness is the most authentic and faithful response to the doubts we all have about ourselves, about our world, and about God. It is the extraordinary and beautiful realization that the same God who permits us to feel those doubts, to be humbled by our experiences, to feel shame, to feel inadequacy, to make mistakes, to be depressed, to be uncertain. That same God who has allowed me to feel those things in my life is the same God who has put people like all of you in this room in my life. And I can tell you this, in your toughest moments, Taking the time to reach down, to lift someone else up, is the greatest thing you can do for yourself. Tim Russert, who some in the room will remember as a preeminent journalist, taken far too soon, and all of us in the room should know as the alumnus of a Jesuit high school, famously said, "The best exercise for the human heart is reaching down to lift someone up." It's a reminder that our hearts are muscles, too, just like our biceps and our quads and our pecs. And we need to exercise that muscle. It's our heart, I think, that ultimately responds to truth, to what is honorable, to justice, to purity, to love, to grace, and to excellence. To walk humbly is to be precisely the person you actually are before God. And at the heart of any faith journey is the acknowledgement that we all take part in the human experience of struggle, of coming up short, of doubting, and ultimately of sinning, but that God loves us anyway. It's the meaning of agape, love that is unconditional, that is undeserved, and sometimes unreturned, but love that transcends. Well, God, I'm a sinner. I've made mistakes. I've fallen short. I've doubted myself and I've doubted you. But I trust I am loved. How do I know that? I simply look. That means so much to me, but more importantly, it should mean so much to you, because you should never doubt your goodness and your ability to be an instrument of this love. As Micah says, you have been told what is good. And I think St. Paul knew this when he wrote, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence and if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing what you have learned and received and heard and seen in me. Then the God of peace will be with you." What more could you or I possibly hope for in this one wild and precious life? Thank you.
Mr. Baber, while your words have stirred us, maybe moved us to tears, inspired us, it really is the example of your life, your kindness, your humility, your generosity, and your boldness to tell us the truth. From the bottom of our hearts, we thank you. Gentlemen.